This is George Dionne with Metal Express Radio, and I'm here with Howard Johnson of the band Dawn After Dark. How you doing today, Howard?
I'm good, George. How are you?
I'm doing great. If I knew absolutely nothing about Dawn After Dark, how would you describe the band's music to me?
I would say if you take the offspring, probably illegitimate, of the Cult and AC/DC, you'd be getting somewhere close.
That sounds about right. The Dawn After Dark band has been kind of defunct for quite a few years. They just got back together in 2019. How did that all happen?
Yeah, it's a crazy story, really. I mean, we were a band that existed towards the end of the 80s in the UK, had a small deal with an independent label called Chapter 22 and released 3 12-inch singles, never got around to recording an album, but did about 150 dates all over the UK. So we were quite an active band at the time. And then, as often was the way with these groups, internal combustion meant that it all fell apart and we all went our separate ways. And of course, life got in the way and many years went by. And in 2019, completely out of the blue, I got a call from a music promoter in the UK asking if we'd be interested in reforming for a show with a band called Balaam and the Angel, who I don't know if you remember, but they had 3 albums out, late 80s. And we toured with them a lot at the time. And it was something that we really hadn't considered. And the drummer and I, who'd been in touch for many years as friends, talked about it and thought it might be a fun thing to do. And it literally was done for fun. And so, long story short, we put the band back together. We played the show in Birmingham, which was our hometown in England. And we're amazed to see a large number of people walking around the streets of Birmingham pre-show wearing Dawn After Dark t-shirts, which frankly wasn't expected. And we had such a good time at the show and we went down very well. And then the guy who promoted us asked if we'd be interested in recording an album, and it's just snowballed from there. And from that point on, we've kind of, COVID obviously played a part in putting the brakes on, but we've managed to get the album recorded. And as you know, we've kind of started cranking up the band again.
Well, let's talk about the singles that you've put out so far. The first one is Maximum Overdrive. From what I understand, you did release this prior. This is an updated version, correct?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's a fun story because the original version of Maximum Overdrive, which was recorded in '89, was actually produced by Stevie Young of AC/DC, which was quite a coup. He was, at the time, living in Birmingham where the band was based and running a rehearsal room and kind of 8-track recording studio. So we got to know Stevie and he produced that original version. But as was the way with bands of our stature at that time, it was hard to make recordings. It was hard to really capture what the true sound of a band was. That was a fine recording for 1989, as good as could be done at the time. But we always felt it was unfinished business and that we could really represent the band far better. And of course, the technology that's available now means that you can do so. And so it was always a fan favourite. We wanted to show what it would feel like and sound like updated. So that's what we did.
Excellent. And you just put out your second single, Nothing Can Fulfill. Yeah, I can't read today. Nothing can fulfill me without your love.
Exactly.
Is that a kind of an older song that you pulled from, or is that new?
Well, the interesting part of the recording process for the album that we've just done was that there were a number of songs that never got recorded back in the 80s. We were quite prolific in terms of writing. And some of those were kind of pretty much fully formed, and some of them were bare bones ideas. And so we went back through a lot of the old recordings that we'd done in rehearsals and put the songs together and looked at what we thought was still going to be appropriate, relevant, and could sound contemporary. And Nothing Can Fulfill Me was a song that was really, probably I would say 80% constructed back in the 80s, and the extra 20% of magic, hopefully magic, was added by ourselves in 2020 when we recorded the album.
And the album's all completed?
Album's all completed. It's going to be released in the UK on December the 4th. And the funny part of the story is that it comes out on Chapter 22, which was the original label we were with all the way back in the 80s. Of course, the label was defunct in the same way that the band was. But the guy who originally asked us about coming back and reforming for the show was also in the process of reigniting the Chapter 22 label, which was partly owned in the 80s by members of Balaam and the Angels. So it all comes round full circle. It's incestuous, but in a good way.
This current version of Chapter 22 is sort of a unique place. I saw you post some pictures. There's sort of not just music, but they go a little beyond music.
Yeah, Chapter 22, as it exists today, is very much a passion project of a guy whose name is Dean Brown. He's the owner of the label. And it basically functions as a label for bands that he has great passion for, but he also owns a record store in Bath, which is one of the most picturesque cities in the UK. And it's only a new venture. He opened the doors to the Chapter 22 store about 3 weeks ago now. And it's what I call, the idea is to be a man creche. So it's basically a record store that deals in vinyl with a lot of old school values. So you can go in there and there are listening booths and you can hear records and everything's on vinyl. And it's where women place their menfolk when they want to go shopping and the men are bored. And so you can go in there and you can have a really fun time with people who are of like mind. And while your wives do the shopping, you men can sit around and talk about 80s rock music to your heart's content. And the really clever part of it is that Dean's partner has also put kind of like a plant store in there, so that when the women folk come back, they can go, I've been good to you and let you listen to music with your mates all afternoon, but I'm going to have a plant as my reward for doing so. So it's kind of like, it's a modern concept of an old idea, but I don't know what it's like in the States, but vinyl has taken off massively in the UK again, and it just seems like a good time to do it. And I spoke to Dean recently, and he said, the first 2 weeks have been fantastic. So fingers crossed. It'll be a good venture. And for us, it's really exciting because on December the 4th, when the album comes out, we're doing a launch show in Bath, like a regular electric show in the evening, but also an acoustic show in the store in the afternoon. So we'll do like 4 or 5 acoustic songs in the afternoon. And then the album launch show, the album's called New Dawn Rising, and that'll be full electric show in the evening.
Is the new album going to be pressed on vinyl, or are you going to see how it does first and then press it on vinyl?
No, absolutely. We're strictly old school, so it has to also be vinyl. So we have, I guess, what you call a 3-pronged attack, George. There is a pre-order, which is going to go live at the start of October, whereby there will be a version of the album that will contain an exclusive track that won't be available anywhere else. So anyone who pre-orders will get that exclusive track. It will also be available on 180-gram orange vinyl. Our band colours have always been orange because we never want it to be seen as gloomy and gothic. So it has to be orange vinyl. And then there'll be the regular version of the CD that will be on open sale come December.
I saw that Andy Taylor is listed as the producer of Maximum Overdrive. Is that the Andy Taylor?
Well, I would say it is the Andy Taylor, but probably not the Andy Taylor you're thinking of. The Andy Taylor that we used is also a native of Birmingham, as was the Power Station Duran Duran guitarist. He obviously spent a lot of time in Birmingham, but it's not the same man.
No.
So we don't mind the fact that there may be a bit of a misunderstanding, and if we can ride on the coattails of saying it was the guy from the Power Station, then we're happy to do so.
So is your older material available somewhere? Is it the old EPs and stuff like that, or is that pretty much just like a collector's item at this point?
The old EPs, if you're rooting around on collectors' websites and on eBay, they are available. We did have them up on streaming platforms for a while, but we deliberately took them off the streaming platform purely because we want people to focus on what we're doing now. We have a very solid old fan base, but clearly it's really important to us to reach new ears and to show people what the band's about. And there is confusion, as you know, because Maximum Overdrive existed in a version from '89. So right now, we've removed those from streaming platforms. Didn't please all of our old fans, but I think they understood once we explained the logic. But they will return at some point. But right now, the focus is very much on the 2 singles, Maximum Overdrive and Nothing Can Fulfill Me. And the old songs will return at a later date.
Sounds good. After the band broke up in the late 90s, did you move on to any other musical ventures? I know that you moved on to some writing ventures.
Well, to be honest with you, I'd always been a writer and had started out as a music journalist on the highly famous British metal mag Kerrang! And I got my start there when I was very young, when I was 17. So I'd already been involved in music writing. But once the band split, I had an interesting career turn in that I went and worked for a couple of years for Iron Maiden's management company because I was very friendly with a lot of the people in Iron Maiden. I'd done a lot of work on Kerrang! With the Maiden guys. A tip for Maiden fanatics: if you look at the official video from behind the Iron Curtain from 1984, I don't know if you know that, but that's an official video that was out there documenting that very groundbreaking tour in communist Poland. There, if you look closely, you'll find me lurking in the background. So I went back with Maiden. At that point, I went and worked with Maiden for a couple of years before deciding that I just wasn't a corporate body and came back to writing. But musically, I really did very little. And it was never on the agenda to reform Dawn After Dark. It was purely serendipity that meant that we did it, and the fact that somebody asked us. And what I found is that I'm really, really glad that it did, because it pushed me into doing something that perhaps, I wouldn't have done otherwise. And the joy that I got out of doing it again, and the sense of achievement in making music, has been fantastic. I've loved every minute of it.
You're also currently the editor of Rock Candy magazine, and I see that Rock Candy is very about the classic artists and the classic music, and kind of because there's nothing really just for that. But you're also big on print, like you offer a digital subscription. You don't care to, but you have to have that print with it. So what do you think of this online coverage? We can call it journalism. I'm part of it myself, and I have been for almost 15 years now. But what do you think of that taking over print media and physical media?
Well, I'm obviously a rock guy of a certain age. So for me, the joy of holding a magazine in my hands and getting the print on my fingers will never leave me. But I don't like to think I'm a Luddite. So I understand that there is a movement away, and of course the direct access that people have to be able to listen to music and make their own minds up about music, I think is a positive thing. It probably would have done me out of a career, because of course when I was writing, my opinion was held as very much sacrosanct by people, because there wasn't the opportunity for people to listen for themselves. I think that it's democratized music so that people make their own minds up, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. So I think, you can't live entirely in the past. You have to accept and understand that there is a new way of processing cultural elements, and music in particular. But there's also a place for the joys of the old methodologies. One of the things I like about doing Rock Candy is the fact that we can go deep. It's not about a 500-word hit and then some visual. The people who read the magazine are people who followed rock music for 30 years, 40 years. And I think that they are now sufficiently ingrained in that culture that they like to read articles that go deep. So our magazine is chock full of 8, 10, 12, 15-page features. And I don't make apologies for that. The new media allows people to access content in a different way, but we do something that the new media can't offer, and I think those two things can probably coexist quite happily.
I have to agree. And that kind of goes side by side with your views on vinyl, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to hold vinyl in my hands. I love to play vinyl. I think it has a certain warmth to the tones that is very hard to reproduce on a CD. I mean, I'm not a technical guy, so I couldn't tell you why that would be. I'm sure plenty of people could, but there is something joyous in holding a piece of vinyl, and it takes me back to when I was a 13-year-old kid discovering rock music for the first time and spending every last penny I had on vinyl, and the joy of being able to really get into the detail of a sleeve and to look at every lyric and to decide, wow, I really know everything about this band that there is to know. that's a joy that never leaves you. And that kind of takes us back, like you said, to the man crush. And, you know, that joy of sharing and discovering artists on vinyl will always be dear to me and probably to a lot of people of my generation, because it was hard to find music, wasn't it? You know, you'd hear about things and you wouldn't know what they sounded like, and you'd buy things based on how much you enjoyed the cover, how much you thought the cover spoke to you and your aesthetics and your taste. And I think it seems to me that that's coming back as well. A lot of young people seem to be very excited by the idea of vinyl. And of course, you know, just the physical size of a piece of vinyl gives you the opportunity to give people kind of, you know, more for their money and to discover more about bands. So, yeah, I mean, I'm unashamedly a vinyl guy.
That's good. And you're a classic rock guy, too. Do you think that, you know, your magazine's mantra is kind of like classic rock is the kind of rock, but do you see anything in the modern music that's kind of on the same level? I see a lot of bands coming out of Sweden and Europe, and they're kind of waving that classic rock, 80s style rock and roll, arena rock alive.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, hey, our DNA in Dawn After Dark is that we were around in the 80s. We were young guys in the 80s. So there's going to be a natural affinity for that classic rock sound. But having said that, I was always very interested in other styles of music. I didn't want to just be a guy who would listen to what you would have called the classic, you know, radio bands of the 80s. So, you know, your Poisons and your Journeys and your Foreigners and all that stuff, which was huge in America and had its good points. But it wasn't the only kind of music that was out there. So I was always very interested in discovering other forms of music. Bands like the Sisters of Mercy and Killing Joke and The Mission were all part of my DNA growing up. And so I think that just has continued through. I still listen to all kinds of music. I clearly am not as plugged into modern music, be it rock or other, as I was when I was 22. I wouldn't pretend that I was. But I always think it's really important to listen to all kinds of different musics and to have an open mind to them, because it will always seep into what you create. You know, I look at what we do in Dawn After Dark seems to me like classic rock, and yet other people say, but I hear something of Killing Joke in there. I hear something of The Cult in there. I hear something of the Sisters of Mercy in there. Now, to my ears, that's not what we sound like at all. But clearly somewhere, having an interest in a much broader variety of music seeps into what you do. And I think that has to be a positive thing.
Absolutely. Live music starting to kick back up a little bit. Are you going to be able to take Dawn After Dark out there on tour?
Yeah, we are. Funnily enough, this weekend we're doing a pledges only gig. So the way that we funded our album was that we asked our small but perfectly formed loyal bunch of hardcore fans to fund the actual recording of it, because the record label was, you know, still a small label, a passion project, as I mentioned. So the quid pro quo was that the record label would support the manufacture and the distribution and the marketing of the record, and it was down to us to fund the recording. And we went to our loyal fan base, and fortunately they all put their hands in their pockets and the money was raised. And the quid pro quo of that was that we said, okay, anybody who contributes will be invited to a special fan-only gig in our hometown of Birmingham. And that happens this Saturday, and I'm very excited to see everybody who's helped us come back to life. And then we have an album launch show in Bath, which I mentioned, which is the hometown of the record label. And then we play our first London show in 35 years or something like that, on December the 18th. And then at the end of December, we're going to be playing 3 shows with our good friends in Balaam and the Angel again. So there is an opportunity for the band to be back out on the road. We really hope that we'll see new fans as much as old fans. And of course, the excitement of just live music being back and happening should make those shows really fun. And I'm itching to get at it.
Absolutely. I like what I hear on the two new singles. I'm looking forward to the full album. The full album's called Maximum Overdrive, right?
No, the full album's called New Dawn Rising, for
New
obvious
Dawn
reasons.
Rising, much
New
better.
Dawn Rising. So that'll be out, as I say, on December the 4th. If people go to our website, which is www.thedawners.com, the details about where to order the album will be on there from the 3rd of October. And obviously, we hope people will support our endeavours. It's a whole new world these days for rock bands, as I'm sure you know, George. But without the fans, as we put on our pledge T-shirts that we gave to everyone, without you, we're nothing.
Absolutely. That's all I have for you today, Howard. I appreciate you taking the time.
Really appreciate talking to you, George. It's lovely to chat, and thank you very much for your interest.